Simcha,
Recording in progress.
Gereres Simcha, Gereres Mitzvah. Okay, so we are learning a mimer from Tavshin Mem Aleph, Shabbos Parshas Vayakil. So the Rebbe begins as follows: Vayakil Moshe is called as Bnei Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu congregated, gathered, brought together all the congregation of the Bnei Yisrael, the entire Adas Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Aleim, and he told them, Eila Hadvarim, these are the matters that Hashem commanded. Sheishes Yamim Tasem Malacha. 6 days you should do, or Tiyasem Malacha. 6 days work shall be done. Over Yom HaShvi, Gomer, on the 7th day you shall rest. Afterwards, Moshe Rabbeinu told them about the work of the building of the Mishkan and making the different vessels that are inside the building of the Mishkan. It's known the examination and analysis of this in the Mamarim of Arabei Marnesiim. Skip the brackets to 2 lines down. The end of the beginning, the first word on the line, second word on the line. How come when Hashem commanded Moshe Rabbeinu, in other words, in Parshas Truma, Kitav, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, over there, all the commands for the building of the Mishkan. First, it speaks about the vessels of the Mishkan, it speaks about the honor, etc. Then it speaks about the work of the actual building of the Mishkan, the curtains that were draped over that made the ceiling and draped over the walls. And afterwards, after everything, then it speaks about Shabbos. And here is when Moshe Rabbeinu gave over what Hashem told him in Parshas Terumah. So in Parshas Vayakil, he's saying really the same thing, but he flips around the whole order. So he says, "B'tzivu Moshe Yisrael kan hafach haseder," and the command of Moshe Rabbeinu to the Yidden here, he turned the order around. He first told them the mitzvah of observing Shabbos. And afterwards he told them the malacha of the Mishkan. And afterwards he told them about the vessels. So again, we have just the total opposite than the way it was in Parshas Truma Tetzaveh. In Parshas Truma Tetzaveh, first was the Kalim, then the building of the Mishkan, then Shabbos. Here started off with Shabbos, then was the Yeriyos, and then the Kalim. Gamtor have most many understand. Mashanemer kan vayakil Moshe. Why over here does it say and Moshe Rabbeinu gathered them? He congregated them. Lama haisaki lazois kan yosef mishar mitzvah Hashem asher dibur Moshe bnei Yisrael. Why was there this gathering over here? More than all other mitzvahs of the Eibishter that Moshe spoke to the Yidden. There were all types of times throughout the Chamisha Chumshei Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden mitzvahs. It doesn't say by all the other mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu gathered them together. There's many cases of like general commands, not just specific commands. There's also commands for observing the Shabbos, and there's also the matters concerning the building of the Mishkan. By none of those situations doesn't say gathering, that Moshe gathered them. Still and all by them, there was no gathering together. Only over here does it say, and he gathered them. Also, one thing in addition to the gathering, but there's another thing, who gathered them? Why is the emphasis that Moshe gathered them? Why was the gathering specifically through Moshe? It's possible to have been in many different ways. For example, trumpets. They would sound the trumpets, and that would be, depending on what type of blasts and the number of blasts, they would know that they have to gather. Or in a different pasuk it says, they gathered, which means me'atzmam, that they gathered on their own, however that was arranged. My time Moshe. Why is the emphasis over here that Moshe was the one that gathered them? So it's not just a question why only by this mitzvah does it say Vayakil, but the question is also why is it emphasized that who did the gathering? Also, we have to understand what it says over here, the entire congregation of Israel. It could say Vayakil Moshe's Bnei Yisrael, that Moshe Rabbeinu gathered and collected the Bnei Yisrael. What's it? Kol Adas Bnei Yisrael. What's this Adas Bnei Yisrael? The point of the explanation in all of this, second paragraph from the top, or from the bottom. There are two types of ways how Moshe Rabbeinu could say and speak to the Bnei Yisrael. One way is why they dibra Hashem al Moshe al manas leimer of Bnei Yisrael. It's through Hashem speaking to Moshe, with the understanding and on the condition to relate it afterwards to the Bnei Yisrael. Then there's a whole different type of thing. A second manner is Moshe tzarich lifoil badas Bnei Yisrael's inyan ha'kolam. Moshe Rabbeinu has to affect in the Eidah, in the congregation of Yisrael, the collection of the Am Yisrael sheyikahalu lekabel dvar Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu was affecting in the community that they should gather together to receive the word of Hashem. Here we come to that classic Mulmayla lamata, mulmata lamayla. Ve'beza and Yonam dam shacham mulmayla lamata, v'allah mulmata lamayla. And these are the two components of drawing down from above to below and elevating from below to above. Last paragraph on this page will be a protest explanation. This matter more in detail. Here we're going to go a little bit technical in a Chassidus type of perspective of things. So keep your Chassidus and Kabbalah hats on. It's not going to be really Kabbalah, but a Chassidus type of way of looking how communication takes place. When an idea needs to be transmitted from a Rav to a Talmud, from a teacher to a student, there are different components. And the Rebbe is going to explain there's the components the way they are from the coming from the Rav to the Talmud, and the components the way they're from the Talmud to the Rav. And every hashpah, from the giver, from the one that imparts the idea to the receiver, there's a difference between whatever he's imparting, the way it's still in the mashpia himself, in the giver himself, in the source, the sham kala yanim heim lamitasim, the way they are in its source, everything is completely true. Lebein kabbalah saydiyam kabbalah vamushba, versus the way the receiver receives it and the one that's being influenced receives it. He needs to contemplate on it. In other words, when the mashpia has the thought in his mind, so then the idea is in its pure, truest state. Once it leaves the world of the mashpia to go to the world of the makabel, there could be room for either miscommunication or not having a total communication. Not everything became communicated. Parts of it were left without clarity, not for the mashpia's fault, but in the process of communicating, there must be that the makabel, that the receiver is now making sure to take this in well. And the Rebbe divides it into three stages. The chol hashpah yesh ba gimel dargis. Every type of flow from the giver to the receiver has in it three levels. B'yoysa eitzel rava mashpia, while it's still by the teacher, while it's still by the mashpia. Betchila, initially, hu etzem hamshacha liskarav lashpia. First is the very fact that the mashpia, the Rav, is like leaving himself to become close to the process of giving this over. He hasn't yet given it over, he hasn't yet lowered himself, but there's the initial movement towards transmission. And afterwards, It's what's being drawn down in a transcendent way. It's not yet fully comprehended by the student. It's still just like above, and it's given over in a very general manner. And the Mashpia imparts the generalities of the topic. And afterwards, the third stage is where it comes down to the student in an internalized fashion, in detail, that the student is able to absorb it in all of its aspects. This order, that there is the very closeness, and then there is the makif, and then there's the pnimi, that's the way it's coming from the teacher to the student. But in the receiving of the student, the order is the opposite. What does that mean? So he says on the top of the next page, the betchilam, initially, tzarich is battle. First, the student has to put himself aside. He needs to become nullified. He cannot look at it now. This is my perspective. If you're going to look at it with your own ego, you're not going to receive what the teacher is trying to say. One needs to put aside their own self and make themselves entirely into a vessel. And afterwards, mekabel hamshacha if he receives the hamshacha in a transcendent, general fashion and an encompassing way, and then he receives the very essence of what was there by the Rav. He says in the second paragraph, but this will be understood what Moshe said initially over here, the idea of the observing of Shabbos, and afterwards the work of the Mishkan. And and only afterwards about the making of the vessels of the Mishkan, because in this parsha we're talking about the ascent from below to above. Like we said before, it's the gathering of the nation, we said earlier, to receive and to become imbued with the word of Hashem. So since it's coming from below to above, it's like the student receiving from the teacher. Therefore, first things first, there has to be the bittul, we said. The student has to put himself aside. Therefore, the first thing it talks about is the observance of Shabbos. It's the idea of the receiver nullifying themselves, sublimating themselves. And that is the simple idea of what Shabbos is about. The Zoh Pashtus Inyan HaShabbos, that's the simple idea of Shabbos. The person rests from all of his mundane matters, becomes a vessel to receive the Hamshacha from above. What is that in a person's ordinary day-to-day service? Which aspect of his daily life mimics that Shabbos state, that bittul state? Tefillah is also putting myself aside for Hashem. That's why in Shabbos primarily there has to be the focus on davening. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that even people that work, when it comes to Shabbos, they don't have to work, they have to spend more time meditating on davening and so on. He says, like the Chazal say, with great difficulty did the Chachamim allow to speak words of Torah on Shabbos. They felt, in other words, based on what the Rebbe is saying here in this Maimer, that the most important focus of Shabbos should not even be Torah, it should be Tefillah, because Shabbos is about bittul and Tefillah is about bittul. It says that in the weekdays itself, everything is b'hiskalus, everything is intermingled. You have the Shabbos of every day of the week. What's the Shabbos part of every day of the week? When I'm davening, I'm supposed to be removed, more so than by Torah learning, more so when I'm doing a mitzvah. By davening, I have to be completely removed from worldly involvement. So that's the Shabbos of the weekday. That's why every day the beginning of a person's service is with davening. So davening is because when I'm coming from below to above, I need to be in a state of bittul. So I start off with davening. After the preparation of davening, once I've mastered the first stage of the student's approach to the idea, once I've had the bittul, he goes from shul to learning, to yeshiva, that's the study of Torah. Torah study is coming from above to below, like it says Hashem spoke to us on Har Sinai. He came down to us from Har Sinai. That's like drawing down the idea in a transcendent, encompassing way. It doesn't yet merge with the world. Afterwards, the Gemara says, once a person has been the Beis Knesset in Shul davening, and he's already been in the Beis Medrash, in the yeshiva learning, then you can act the ways of the earth. He goes to be involved with this physical world, this low world, to make a home for the Eibusher down here below, which is a connection with the very essence of Hashem, as we know that Hashem's very essence desired to be manifest and coming down in this world to be a home, to have this world be a home for the Eibusher. All of this begins with Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is going to ask now the question, why did it have to be Moshe Rabbeinu that made this Vayakil? The power and capability for this gathering is through Moshe Rabbeinu. Though who has the courage and the chutzpah to approach and compare themselves to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Shalom, still in all and Betanya, it's explained in Tanya, Moshe Rabbeinu Nikrei Mehem, Moshe is called the faithful shepherd. Therefore, every single soul from amongst the Yidden has in them from the level of Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Shalom. Pirish Raya Mehem Nahu, and the meaning of a faithful shepherd, that Moshe Rabbeinu is called a faithful shepherd, meaning not only is he a reliable shepherd, but like Chassidus explains, that he is a shepherd who feeds them like a shepherd takes out his flock to graze. The same thing Moshe Rabbeinu feeds and takes his flock out to graze. What does he feed them? He feeds them faith. Though Yidden are by their very DNA, they are believers, children of believers. Still in all Mikol Makim, Poil Behem Moshe Sam Shachas Emunah, still in all Moshe Rabbeinu causes the drawing down of the faith, or the Emunah. It says in the pasuk, you shall feed faith. And all the 248 limbs and organs and the 365 blood vessels, sinews, veins, etc. All your heart and all your soul and all your might, meaning that without Moshe Rabbeinu, I could have belief, but my belief should not become internalized into my actions. I could sometimes act not in accordance with my belief. Moshe Rabbeinu's effect is to feed us the belief that just like when a person eats, the food becomes ingested and digested and becomes part of the very person themselves. The same thing, Moshe Rabbeinu feeds us faith. He causes that the belief becomes part of us in every aspect and every component of our being. By day nekudas ha'emunah, through this point of emunah that Moshe Rabbeinu feeds us, poil b'hamas ha'kol of Allah, he affects that the Yidden now congregate together, and they elevate, they rise up, like we said before. That they should be in a state of nullification and a state of cessation. Like it's brought down the Gemara. Since in regards to Moshe, the awe of Hashem is considered a minor thing. There's the famous Maimer Chazal, the Alter Rebbe refers to it in Tanya, that it says, Ma Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Yidden, Ma Hashem shoyel mi'imach kim l'yiraisi, that what does Hashem ask of you? Only to fear Hashem. And the Gemara asks, Yira milsa zutusi, is then Yira, is an awe of Hashem a minor thing? So the Gemara answers yes. In regards to Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a minor thing. Comes the Alter Rebbe and asks, what does it help that in comparison to Moshe Rabbeinu, Yira Bittul is a minor thing? But then Alter Rebbe explains, yes, every Yid has Moshe Rabbeinu within him. So therefore, Harehi Milsa Zutrasi L'Gav Kol Echad Vech Misrol, it's also considered a minor thing for every single Yid. Because Moshe Rabbeinu causes that Yid, every single Yid, should have this awe of Hashem and this self-nullification and abnegation before Hashem, sublimation before Hashem. Through this bittul, that he ceases and puts aside his entire being, because it's felt in the person that I was not created only to serve my Maker. That's the meaning of being bottled, that he feels that his entire being is only for Hashem. So through that, he can collect and elevate all the Yid. Like it says, if those of you that have been scattered are at the edges of the heavens, in other words, very far away from there, he will collect you. So just like Hashem collects all the Yidden from wherever and how far they are, so too in the avodah of a person. He collects and gathers all of his soul powers, and all of his thoughts, and all of his speech, and all of his actions. They should all be vessels for receiving the flow from above. So that's why the first thing, as an expression of Vayakil, is the mitzvah of Shabbos, because we collect all of our koiches, we collect everything of ourselves, thanks to Moshe Rabbeinu, who influences us with the level of bittul, and then we can have the mitzvah of Shabbos, that we have the elevation from below to above. Second paragraph on the page, through this avodah we affect the flow that comes down from above. Initially, we have the curtains of the Mishkan, the Ikrim Migdash. The Mishkan is also called the Migdash because when it says Migdash, they shall make for me a Migdash, a sanctuary, that is referring initially to the Mishkan that was built. So they're interchangeable terms. Shehem B'chinas Makif. The Yeriyos are in a state of Makif. These are the curtains that surround it, it's the curtains that's the ceiling. It's all encompassing. And afterwards in the vessels of the Mishkan, the vessels about drawing down an inner type of Amshacha, an essential type of Amshacha. Either there's different ways of counting the amount of materials that were used in the making the Mishkan, either 13 or 15 things. But the number is, all these specific numbers indicate that there were detailed hamshachas of whatever had to come down into the world. Skip the parentheses. What does this mean? The service of a Yid Hashem. That we make for Hashem a home down here below. The Inyan Hadira who the idea of a home is like in an analogy. That the one that lives over there is found over there with all of his matters, including the essence of the very one who lives. When a person's a guest, they're always limited. They're not there in their full expression. When a person is at home, home is where they feel completely comfortable. They are completely themselves. So when we're saying we're making a home for Hashem, we're not just making a bias for Hashem or something. A home means that Hashem is found there in his entire essence with all of his things. And similar is in the metaphor. We make a home for Hashem's very essence. That's what it means that we asked earlier in the Maimer. Why does it say Adas B'nai Yisrael? Why couldn't it just say Moshe Rabbeinu gathered the B'nai Yisrael? What's the Adas B'nai Yisrael? The Adas Meloshen Eidus. In Mamorim, it's explained that Adas, from the word congregation, is related to a similar word, Eidus, testimony, witnesses. Like it says, Atem Eidain Hashem. The Navi says that the Yidden, the Jewish people, are considered, you are my witnesses. Yisrael, the Jewish people, are the witnesses and testify to God, to God's presence in the world. Okay, dua, like it's known, the inyan ha'edus atem edai wal atzis muhus, the idea of testimony that we call you are my witnesses, is referring to testifying about Hashem's very essence. The Yisrael hema edim al tzmusim musis baruch Yidden are testifying on Hashem's very essence being here. It's explained in the writings of the Arizal, on the pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu gathered. Moshe Rabbeinu needed to collect and to gather the members of his generation. That the Chazal say that the members of the generation of Moshe, those that were the Doir Hamidbar, were a Doir Deya, a knowledgeable generation. They weren't like minor individuals. That's what it means, kol adas. So adas, he's also playing out the word adas is the same letters like the word das. Shahayu misoid hadas, because they're doirdeya. In other words, that they were the inner level of das was manifest in that generation. It says Moshe Rabbeinu was also the level of das, and that's why, because he was from the level of das, he could impart that the emunah should permeate them, because that's the idea of das. Das is about internalization. And afterwards, over there in the writings of the Arizal, Moisef Sham Dvar Davar Nifla, he adds a wondrous thing over there in the words of the Arizal. The Gam Erev Rav B'Gematria Das. The words Erev Rav, meaning the mixed multitude that Moshe Rabbeinu took out of Mitzrayim, and they were at fault for the Chet HaEgel, and Hashem pointed at Moshe and said, this is your nation, your people, the Erev Rav, that you decided to take them out, that made this whole problem. The words Erev Rav is a numerical equivalent of Das. And it was Moshe Rabbeinu's job to fix them up, to elevate the Erev Rav. Yes, now the Rebbe goes on to say, perhaps we could explain the Mekivish Nikro Amcha, since Hashem called the Erev Rav Amcha, like we learned in last week's Sedra, that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that your nation that you took out of Mitzrayim went off the way. And like I mentioned before, because it's not referring to the rest of Klal Yisrael, it's referring specifically to the Erev Rav, to the mixed multitude. Moshe, the nation of Moshe, this nation that you raised up. Upirish Rashi, and Rashi explained, the mixed multitude that you took them out, that you accepted them on your own, not because I told you to take them. Since Moshe Rabbeinu took them out, they were called his nation. It was his job. Moshe had to repair them. Moving for this understood. Moshe Rabbeinu elevates not just the understanding generation, even the mixed multitude, that's the numerical equivalent of Adas. I'm sorry, not Edus, but Adas, which is Adas and Das. Same words, different combination of letters. Same letters, different words. He takes the Erev Rav and he transforms them, because Moshe Rabbeinu has that power and brings them into to be part of Adas B'nai Yisrael. Till the ultimate ascent, in the ultimate perfection of the ascent. Moshe gathered them by days of Poils Mishkan. Through that he effects that it can come down in the curtains of the Mishkan that we said, which is the level of Makib, the transcendent level, or the Kliya Mishkan, and the vessels of the Mishkan. After the Parsha Vayakal, that over there in Parsha Vayakal relates the command of Moshe to the Bnei Yisrael. So after that, we come to the Parsha, next week's Parsha. These are the numbers, the count of the Mishkan. Over there in the next week's Parsha, it relates the actual fulfillment of the command that Moshe said, that they erected the Mishkan and all of its vessels. And then the Rebbe concludes with a bracha, and through studying these topics, we come to the fulfillment of the promise that you will be collected one by one. Not a single holy spark will remain in exile. Through Moshe collecting and gathering everybody together, including all these sparks. Like it says, Moshe and Aaron will come out of Golus with them. The call godly Yeshuva Heina, and a great congregation will return over here, meaning also referring to the congregation of all the sparks of holiness that are embedded in Golus. L'Eretz HaKodesh, to the Holy Land, Yerushalayim HaKodesh, into the Holy City Yerushalayim, L'Beis HaMikdash Shlishi, the third Beis HaMikdash, Migdash, the Ikrim Mishkan, the Migdash that's also called Mishkan, the Kar B'Yameinu Mamish, soon in our days Mamish, Begula Mitzvah Shlema Mamish, in the true and complete redemption Mamish.